On behalf of our board of directors of Ukrainian Canadian Art Foundation, welcome to the Contemporary Ukrainian Emigre and Diaspora Literature. My name is Uliana Hlynchak, and I'm the head of the programming committee, and I'm very excited about today's author, Diana Stevan, who joins us from British Columbia, and her presenter, Maria Shuvalova, who joins us from Kyiv. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that today, February 6th, at the initiative of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, Ukrainian communities all over Canada are gathering together to support Ukraine in person where it is possible or online. The slogan is #StandWithUkraine. In Toronto, our community will be gathering in 1 hour at 2 p.m. at 60 St. Clair Avenue East by the Russian consulate. And here we are starting our Stand with Ukraine 1 hour earlier with this very interesting presentation of literary work by Diana Stevan. Today, Diana will be talking about her family saga, trilogy based on the life of her grandmother in Ukraine and then later in Canada, who endured hardship in Volyn after World War I, and being a widow came with her family to Canada. Lucia is not a celebrity. She is an ordinary woman who endured hardship after hardship, but never gave up or bent. And it is because of women like that, and sons and daughters that they raise. Putin, you will never be able to take our country. We are a peaceful nation who persevere and survive and prosper in the hardest circumstances. And now I would like to introduce our literary critic, Maria Shuvalova, who is a lecturer at the National University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy and Fulbright Scholar. Editorial assistant of the international peer-reviewed journal Kyiv-Mohyla Humanities Journal, co-founder and head of the non-governmental organization New Ukrainian Academic Community, whose latest projects were the publication of a book by Volodymyr Dibrova, Taras Shevchenko, New Perspectives, and international conference, The Female Artist as an Icon of National Modernization, the phenomenon of Lesia Ukrainka in a comparative perspective. Projects were implemented in cooperation with such organizations as the National University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy, Petro-Mohyla Black Sea National University, and Association of Hispanics of Ukraine, Shevchenko Scientific Society in America, and publishing house Bilka. Welcome, Maria.
Thank you, Uliana. Thank you, everyone who just joined us. And I'm sincerely grateful for everyone who these days stand with Ukraine. So let's start our meeting today with some information. Diana has really interesting biography because she worked as a clinical social worker. She has been a teacher, school psychologist, administrator for a firm, model, and actor. By the way, she acted in my favorite serial, X-Files, huge fan. Thank you, Diana, for that work. And also she was a freelance television writer for a sports show, and that's not all list for interesting activities that definitely contributed to Diana's writing. And she debuted in 2012. And in 2012, she published a poem in United Kingdom journal Dreamcatcher and a short story in the anthology Escape. In 2014, was published her debut novel, A Cry from the Deep, which was a romantic mystery and adventure. In 2015 was published Diana's novelette In the Blue Nightgown. And in 2016 was published novel by Diana Stevan, The Rubber Fans. And it's women's fiction inspired by Diana's work on a psychiatric ward in 1972. And it's not all. Diana Stevan is really prolific author. So in 2019, he published her third novel, Sunflower Under the Fire, and it was a finalist in the 2019 Whistler Independent Book Awards for fiction and semi-finalist for the 2019 Kindle Book Award. So congratulations, that's amazing. And last year, in 2021, Diana published her book Lilacs in the Dust Bowl. So today we will focus on sunflowers under fire and lilacs in the dust bowl, as both books tell about life of Lucia Mazurets and her family. And also today we will get some unique information about Diana's next book that will be published soon, so stay with us. A short introduction about the book Sunflowers Under Fire. It depicts Volyn in 1950s, and the main character is Lucia Mazurets, Ukrainian wife and mother, whose husband Gregory is leaving to fight World War, and he informs her wife just after she has given birth of her 8th child, and he leaves for a battle almost immediately afterwards. Soon after that, Lucia and her children are forced to flee the invading Germans. Over the next 14 years, Lucia must rely on her wit and faith to survive and live in refugee camps, survive typhus epidemic, Bolshevik revolution. She had unimaginable losses, and her daughter had forbidden love. So I really hope I didn't make any spoilers, because there is a lot of fascinating events that happened in this book with main character Lucia Mazurets. And the book Lilacs in the Dust Bowl, it's also a book about Lucia Mazurets' life, but there we will read about her and her children that immigrated to Canada in summer of 1927, just before stock market crashes and the Great Depression begins. And first thing you should know about these books, that Sunflowers Under Fire and Lilacs in the Dust Bowl are based on a real life story, on the life of Lucia Mazurets, who is Diana's grandmother, who was a natural-born storyteller. And I must say that Diana Stevan is also a meticulous storyteller. Because second thing you should know, that both books, it's a family saga that is well balanced. What I mean is that you will read their fast-paced and fascinating plot, and all characters are deep and psychologically plausible. Diana Stevan describes extremely tough times. Therefore, they are interesting, and the main hero is really a stoic person. So you won't get depressed. Sometimes you may cry, but you definitely will be inspired to be stoic and to keep going, to keep working. And the main topic of both books will be really interesting for broad audience, because it's family relationship, love. But this book has so much colorful ethnic details. By the way, Diana is a former family therapist, so she definitely uses her knowledge to make great characters and to make this book deep and really interesting. And third thing you should know about this family saga, that it's really multi-layered, which is always a sign of a good fiction. So the first layer is a plot. So 7 armies are fighting with each other, and there is one family that want to make ends meet. So what will happen with these people? You are always intrigued what is going to be next. The second layer is a family story. Diana talks about love, relationship, so it is grasping and it will touch a broad circle of readers. But also it's a story about Ukraine. So there is a lot of interesting information for people who do not know a lot about Ukraine. And these people will definitely understand why we are having war right now and why independence is so important for us. And also this book may fulfill certain gaps for Ukrainians, as this book did for me, because Diana tells about Volyn in the beginning and in the middle of 20th century. At exactly that time, part of my family that was living in Polisia, which is near Volyn, migrated to Canada. Part of my family did it, and we have never heard about them. So Lilacs in a Dust Bowl was a book about what may have happened with part of my extended family. And I haven't been thinking about it until I started reading the book. So Diana, thank you for evoking my cultural memory and my family history. Also, this book is about life of a woman that had to be a breadwinner, an interpreter, a doctor who organized all things for migration, and the woman who was very stoic and somehow realizing how difficult it was for our families to live back there in the past. It makes our current sufferings more bearable. They did it, so we can do it. And that is definitely a story about woman power. Moreover, author touched such topics as gender roles, sexual education, language politics, refugees, epidemics, adaptation, national identities, and culture beyond borders, and much, much more. So I encourage to read these grasping books to everyone, because everyone will find there something familiar and something new. And I hope that one day this book will be translated in Ukrainian, but also I'm really glad that there is such book in English, that this book got recognition as telling how Lukia Mazurets lived. It also depicts how Ukrainians are living right now. And this particular touching and well-written story shows durability of our resistance and our will to live. And I recommend this book to all my friends who do not read in Ukrainian, as this family saga grasps you, that makes you forget about work, about routine. You definitely may read it after a tough day at work, but also this book helps to stand with Ukraine. So a lot of has been said. Diana, we will be fascinated to hear more how you were working on this book, how you were researching your family history. So the floor is yours, and thank you so much for writing this family saga.
Thank you so much, Maria, for such a beautiful introduction. Thank you. That was lovely, and you explained what Sunflowers Under Fire is about. And I thought I would start with reading a small section, a couple of pages from Sunflowers Under Fire, and then I will show some slides about my research. And at the end, I will do a little bit of from Lilacs in the Dust Bowl and a few pages, well, actually one page from my work in progress, Paper Roses on Stony Mountain. So the scene I'm going to read to you from Sunflowers Under Fire is near the beginning of the book, and it's just after my Baba, Lukia, has given birth to her last child, Eudokia. And while she's been giving birth, her husband is away in Lutsk, signing up to fight for the Tsar's army. It's World War I. So Baba Lukia has had a little rest. Her baby is sleeping, and this is where the scene begins. After a nap with Eudokia, Lukia placed another clean cloth between her legs to stem the bleeding and went to the kitchen to prepare supper. She was stirring cabbage with tomatoes on the stove when she heard the front door creak. She turned to see Gregory standing in the doorway wearing a soldier's uniform. Her worst fears had come true. Lukia choked back tears and showed her back, but not before she saw Gregory's eyes widen with the discovery that she was no longer with child. Her legs felt rooted in cement while she waited for an apology. None came. He stood for a few minutes as if he too was waiting for some word. and then went into their bedroom where Eudokia lay sleeping. Gnashing her teeth, Lucia stirred the vegetables with force. She tried to calm herself to avoid spilling any precious food. Not long after, Gregory returned to the main room. As if nothing out of the ordinary had happened, he came up behind her and fondled her breasts. She whirled around and pushed him so hard he stumbled on the uneven clay floor. "What?" he said, grabbing the top of the spindle chair to keep from falling. "You have a beautiful girl and you're angry? What's this?" She poked his khaki shirt. He stretched out his arms and twirled around, showing off his new uniform. "I look handsome, yes?" For a moment, she admired his fine figure in a tunic, breeches, and leather boots. But once she saw the peaked cap in his hand, her fury rose like smoke from a dying fire. The badge on his cap displayed the Romanov colors of black, white, and orange. He grinned. "They also gave me a great coat, a knapsack, and a rifle." "What's it to me?" "Don't say that. The Germans and Austrians are already advancing on Warsaw. Lutsk could be next." "That's what I'm afraid of." Frown all you like, but I promised the Tsar and Tsarina I'd help fight these devils." She spat. "The hell with the Tsar and Tsarina. You promised me first." "What are you saying?" "When we got married," she said, arching her eyebrows, "the priest said we were one flesh, and now you want to tear us apart? When we have to leave at any moment, we'll be forced to run." "If we win this battle, he won't have to leave." "How do you know? Our army, biggest in the world, they say, has been fighting for a year, and where has it got us? Nowhere. From what I've heard, you'll be lucky to be fed." She shook her head. He tightened his lips. "Stop shaking your head. You only make matters worse." "And what are you going to do? Speak Russian?" "The Tsar isn't stopping us from speaking Ukrainian anymore." "Oh, he's had a change of heart, has he?" She waved her fork at him. "It's probably because he needs Ukrainians to do his dirty work. Well, I spit on the Tsar. We're nothing to him." "Lucia." "And what if you get killed?" She put her left hand on her chest to ease the pounding. Gregory's brow furrowed. "I'll be safe. You'll be safe too. The government is organizing shelter and food for refugees." "Huh, as if they could organize anything." She checked the cabbage, found it tender, and took the pot off the stove. "Don't worry. You'll be safe. You'll be sent somewhere with the children." "Somewhere," she said, glaring. "How will you find us?" "I'll find you. Don't worry." "Oi, you have an answer for everything. Are you forgetting I just had a baby? You may as well drown me with the family. Then you'll know where to find us." And I'll leave that reading right there. And I'll go into the research and show you a little bit about why I wrote this book and how I wrote the book. So let's see, share the screen. Okay, so writing Lucia's family saga. My mother was the storyteller in the family. Eudokia Mazurets, and she got the nickname Dunya from her brothers. So we see Eudokia's name in the story, and then later on Dunya. My mother, when I was growing up, she would tell these stories about what happened in the old country, and later on when they immigrated to Canada as well. And as a young girl, I didn't pay a whole lot of attention. You know, you're young and you're not really mindful about some of these stories, especially when my mother or my father would start crying about something that happened. So I didn't do anything with those stories until much later in life. And then when my mother kept repeating those stories, I decided to write them down. And then when I had grandchildren of my own, I would share those stories. And one of my grandchildren, Chloe, suggested I write the book. And I thought, why not? My mother herself told me when she was still alive that this would make a good story. So Sunflowers Under Fire, as Maria said, is about Lucia Mazurets, a Ukrainian farm wife and mother of 6. Eudokia was her 8th child, but she lost 2 before Eudokia was born. She relies on her wits and her faith to survive one of the most turbulent periods in Russian history. This book takes place between 1915, the time of the birth, to 1929, which is when my Baba and what was left of her family came to Canada. Now, why I wanted to write this story, I thought it's a record for generations to come, and I wanted to honor my ancestors, to preserve their stories, and to highlight a culture at a particular time, and to show a way of life that's been lost. And by the way, there'll be time for questions and answers at the end, so if you have any, that would be great. The seeds of my novel. So what I had to work with when I started was I shared a bedroom with Baba, Lucia, until I was 15. So I knew her character, I knew her personality, but she didn't talk about her stories. And I didn't realize until later when I was a family therapist that probably she didn't talk about them because, you know, there was a lot of sad things that happened to her in the old country and also in Canada. So perhaps, you know, the trauma, she didn't want to reawaken those wounds, and she just kept going forward. She didn't want to look back. And it was only because of my mother's anecdotes, that I was able to put some of those pieces together. I also had family photos. I had the birth and death rates of my family members. And because I was first generation Canadian, I was very much a lot of gatherings with my uncles. And so I got to know their characters because they certainly play a role in the family stories. And so those are my memories. And then I also knew the culture and traditions. Even though I was born in Canada, they certainly, all the food, the songs, they would sing after dinner at the table, all of the folk songs. And I also went to Ukrainian school in Winnipeg and did Ukrainian folk dancing. And then we visited my mother's village in Kyiv-Mohyla in 1988. So that was also helpful. And here's my Baba, Lucia, at 81 years of age in Winnipeg, 3 years before she passed away. Just a beautiful woman. She was just so gentle and wonderful. Even though she didn't talk to me about the old country, I got to know who she was. But there were missing pieces in my mother's story. Of course, she was a baby at the and in the old country and didn't come to Canada until she was 14. So there was lots that she didn't know. So I began filling in the blanks. I looked at farming and heritage websites. I looked at newspapers, stories from relatives. My cousin Ganya was a baby when she came to Canada in 1929. She's now in her, I think she's 92, and she still has a very sharp mind, so she was able to give me some stories. And I had some family photos. This is my mother holding the book in her lap in the old country, Eudokia, with a few of her friends. Hanya, with holding the flowers, is my mother's sister. And Hanya, if you recognize from Sunflowers Under Fire, she is on the cover. And that is a friend, Levko, in the background. I don't know who the other young woman is in the photo, but Levko was Hanya's friend. Damien, Hanya's husband. I wish I had more photos, but these were helpful. And this is a family photo that was taken in Winnipeg. My Baba here is 61 in the black satin dress. And from left to right at the back is her eldest son, Hanat. And then next to Hanat is Mihalko, my mother standing up there, and then Havarello. So Hanat, and then he became Mike. And my mother was Eudokia, Dunya, and then Dolly in Canada. And Havarello became Harry. And then below Hanat is Elena sitting on the bench, and she's holding Vera, the baby. And then Genya is the little girl. She was a baby when she came to Canada. And then, of course, faith was very important to my Baba. We went to St. Mary the Protectress Greek Orthodox Cathedral on the corner of Burroughs and St. Clair in Winnipeg. We went faithfully every Sunday. I taught Sunday school in this church. So I knew the faith, a very religious family. I would get down on my knees with my Baba to pray at night before I went to bed. And here is the cemetery where my Baba is buried in Winnipeg, and Klevchuk, my dad's family. So the other brothers are in back here as well. And the graves are very important. We never forgot the blessing of the graves. And you see artificial flowers here, but when I was a young girl, we would plant geraniums and petunias. And the back, you'll see the name Slipchenko. And he is mentioned quite a bit in my third novel, Paper Roses on Stony Mountain. Here's my mother, Eudokia, at 91, still making varaniki in Winnipeg. She was, alert right to the end. And you can see the family photo in back of her on the little chiffonier. So the other research I had to do, Ancestry.com, I watched films like Dr. Zhivago from that period, Zemlya, which means land, and World War I videos online. I talked to Dr. Oleg Garis, who's a professor of Eastern European Studies from the University of Manitoba. I knew him from the church I went to. His father was the priest there. I read many history books on Ukraine. Peter Gattel's work on Eastern European refugeedom was very helpful. My Baba ended up in a refugee camp in the Caucasus during World War I. And there's not very much written about it, so this was very helpful. Relatives' memories, again, I mentioned those. I went to libraries in Vancouver, Winnipeg, Toronto, New York City, and also Stamford, Connecticut, which has a huge Ukrainian library. Unfortunately, a lot of them are in Ukrainian, and even though I can read and write a little, it was too academic for me to get as much as I would have liked to have got out of those books. And I went into websites on Kyiv-Mohyla, which was the village my mother grew up in, and Lutsk is the city that's about 8 kilometers from Kyiv-Mohyla in Volhynia and more. And our family trip to Ukraine, 1988, my mother wanted us to take back to her village, take me back, my husband, and our 2 granddaughters to show the village that she grew up in. Now, at that time, Ukraine was part of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, and Gorbachev was the president. Here's a picture outside of, it's actually in Lutsk, at the castle in Lutsk, and that's my husband there on the balcony. And so I got a sense of the geography and landscape, which was helpful in writing. This was an aunt of my mother's that we visited. And so, again, she was still living much like they had lived. This is a road to her home that we took in Kyiv-Mohyla. And this is in her kitchen in 1988. And then she had the icons on the walls, which is very, familiar. It's what, most Ukrainians have in their homes, with the embroidered rushniks, the embroidered towels around the frames of the icons. And I also used photos online that I found that helped me to write the story. Of course, the chata, the house with the thatched roof, the peach, the oven that they cooked and baked in, and sometimes even like after the fire was down, the young children would sleep on top of the peach to keep warm during the night. And here's a picture I found in Lutsk, refugees fleeing during World War I. The city of Lutsk in Ukraine, which is in Volhynia, the oblast, which is the province of Ukraine. Here are Russian soldiers going off to the front, and Ukrainian soldiers. I mean, it was all part of the Soviet Republic at that time, during the reign of the Tsar. And Olga Nikolaevna, which was a daughter of the Romanov Tsar at that time, the Romanov family, and she was Red Cross nurse during World War I. And my Baba, Baba Lukia, and my mother Eudokia have an encounter with her on the refugee train when they're going to the Caucasus. So there's a chapter where she has a prominent role. And near the end of Sunflowers in the Fire, my Baba, her family is expanding, and it's now under Polish occupation. And they can't expand their land. And Baba is frustrated because she doesn't know how they'll be able to support the family. So at that time, it was being advertised, and Kanadi, it says here, K-A-H-A, Kanadi, Canada. The Canada was offering 160 acres per immigrant, which is equivalent to 130 Morgan, and offering very good land, and for each settler. So this grabbed my Baba's attention, and you'll find out more about that if you read the story. So then I decided I wasn't planning on writing a sequel, but readers were asking for more, and I had my characters already. I had my mother's anecdotes, so I continued Lukia's story. So Lilacs in the Dust Bowl is what takes place well, it shows the immigrant journey to Canada and what takes place when they arrive in Canada. So it's an inspirational family saga about love and heartache during the Great Depression in Manitoba, Canada. So they arrived in August of 1929, and the Depression happened in October. So a few months after, they were hit pretty hard. They sailed on the New Amsterdam, and this is the ship they sailed on when they came from Ukraine up to Rotterdam, and they caught it there. I was fortunate to find Captain Albert's blog online, and I wrote him to find out about what happened on that specific ship, on that journey to Canada, and he was kind enough to write me back. This is a picture of the immigration hall in Halifax where they landed. These happen to be Dutch settlers, but this is what Lukia and her family would have done. They would have arrived at this immigration hall, and they would have sat there, waited for their number to be called, and then they would hopefully be able to get through and be accepted as immigrants to Canada. This is a Union Station in Winnipeg where they would have arrived. It's pretty impressive. And the train station. And this is the immigration office in Winnipeg where they would have gone to find out about the land that was available, what they could get. And the stock market crashed, as I mentioned, in October 1929. The economy tanked. There were so many unemployed. Men were hopping on boxcars trying to get to some kind of job because there weren't jobs available. And I discovered a new character for this novel was nature. Part of the problem with the farmers there was there was these dust storms, there was the grasshopper plagues, drought. This is my Hlynchak, who was the eldest in the family on the farm. I'm sorry the photo is so bad, but that's what I got. With his team of horses on the farm in Manitoba. And these are some of the historical references I used. I read a lot. These are just a small sample. Of course, Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck that talks about the Great Depression in America. Barry Broadfoot, that's Canada, 10 Lost Years. The Great Depression, Pierre Burton. And then Selkirk Avenue, my Baba and mother ended up working as housekeepers, as housemaids for some Jewish families on Selkirk Avenue, and which was a prominent, district there for a lot of Jewish immigrants and for Ukrainian and others, and Heart of the Continent by Christopher DePaul. Which brings me to my third book, Paper Roses on Stony Mountain. That's my mother on the cover. So war, typhus, drought, and family losses could not stop Lukia Mazurk. And will her children's indifference finally break her spirit? And this is a book that I hope to publish this summer. And it introduces my father, and it's my mother and Baba, and that's me as a little girl. And this is in the third book. My dad, he was an immigrant from Bukovina, but he was only 2 years old when he arrived in Manitoba, and his father and family settled in this town with only about 350 people behind the penitentiary. So it's basically a penitentiary town with the guards, and there was a limestone quarry in the back where my grandfather worked And this is a whole series. So I'd like to read to you now a little section from Lilacs in the Dust Bowl and maybe a page from Paper Roses on Stony Mountain, which will be published this summer. So Lilacs in the Dust Bowl continues the story. And oops, what happened here? What did I do? Anyway, don't know what I did. So this section I will read to you is when my Baba is, let's see what I do here.
Before you start reading, maybe
yes.
you can stop sharing your screen so we can see you on the screen, like in the larger format. Oh,
okay,
thank you. It was very interesting presentation. Thank you, Diana.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Now I'm just wondering here. So I seem to have lost the section I wanted to read to you. Well, I will read what I read because I'm not sure where I'm at, to be honest with you. Okay, so I'm going to read a section from when they arrive at, they have to be checked. In Rotterdam, they've been traveling for a week, and this is my Baba and her family, her children, what is left of her family. So Baba says, Lucia, okay, so it starts with Lucia and her with her voice. Lucia understood the necessity for medical scrutiny, but disliked how they were made to line up like cattle for a lice check. The male doctor in a white lab coat examined each head with a magnifying glass under a bright light and reported the results to his female assistant, also in a white lab coat, who wrote the information down. Again, Lucia worried that an official would notice she had dyed her hair. She stood ramrod straight while the doctor studied her scalp. It took only minutes, but it seemed much longer. She breathed normally again when he said, "Next," and waved her on. After that, one by one, they entered a private room and stripped in front of the shipping line's blind female doctor, who, with the help of a nurse, assessed the health of each passenger. Although Lucia silently questioned how a blind physician could be in charge, she thought nothing more of it until Elena came out of the examining room with tears in her eyes. Elena is her eldest son's wife. "What's the matter?" asked Lucia, bouncing her fussy granddaughter in her arms. "The doctor said I have to return home." "What? Why? What's the problem?" "Mama, As Elena struggled to talk, Lucia handed her Genya, that's her granddaughter, and barged ahead of the next person into the examining room. The doctor, a matronly woman with severe features, scowled. "What are you doing here?" "I'm Pani Lucia Mazurets." Lucia had identified herself as a married woman. "You examined my daughter-in-law and refused to sign her papers." "The woman with the hard lump in her breast?" "Yes." "Pani," the doctor said, "it could be cancer or something contagious. We can't take a chance on others getting sick." "Oi, what are you saying? We can't leave without my son and his family." The doctor's face softened. "I'm sorry, but those are the rules." Lucia's mind swirled with the news. She stammered. "Yes, I understand, but she just had a child. This is nothing. Maybe you didn't see. She's a young mother." "I don't have to see to know she's young," the doctor said sharply. "Of course, I didn't mean," Lucia said, adopting a calmer tone. "Then you must know this is normal. Her breasts will soften with time. Please let me talk to the agent responsible for immigration." The doctor hesitated and said, "It won't do any good, but you can find his office on the second floor." Lucia grabbed the doctor's hand and shook it. "Thank you." Without hesitation, Lucia and her family marched upstairs to the second floor. In the corridor outside the immigration agent's office, half a dozen people were waiting for a hearing. A few of the immigrants made room for Lucia and Elena on the bench by the door, while Hnat and his brothers and sisters stood with the others nearby. After what felt like an interminable wait, made more anxious with Ganya's crying, Lucia and Elena entered the agent's office. The middle-aged man sitting behind the desk didn't look up. He finished arranging the papers in front of him in a neat stack, folded his hands and sat back. He regarded Lucia and Elena. "How can I help you?" While Lucia explained the situation, the agent occasionally glanced at Elena, who was jiggling Genya to soothe her. When Lucia had finished, she said, "Please, sir, 1 month and she should be fine to leave." "That's impossible," he said, leaning forward and squinting as if he needed glasses. "They must go to the end of the line. They must wait a year. As it is, once you get to Canada, you'll have to sign an affidavit allowing them to join you the following year. For now, they'll have to go back to their village. I'm sorry. There's nothing I can do." And that's the section from that one. And I will read you a little page from the third novel that will be published this summer. And basically, it's this is a short section from in my mother's voice, and she is brooding over lost love. So she was brooding over, and this happens near the beginning of the novel. Brooding over her lost love, Dunya sat on her bed and brushed her long hair. She tried to make sense of what had happened in Winnipeg. It must have been a mirage, she thought. Otherwise, Peter would have been standing there on the sidewalk when she came out of the jewelry shop. She could have sworn he had been staring at her through the window as she was picking out rings with Sergei. But when she ran out of the shop to see him, there was no Peter in sight, neither north nor south of the store. Thinking he might have dashed across Main Street, she looked at the sidewalk in front of City Hall, but all she saw were a few people entering and exiting the building. Confused about what she'd seen, she decided it must have been a sign from God. He was saying it was Peter she should marry, not Sergei, even though Peter had broken up with her 6 months before. She told Sergei their engagement was over, and she left him standing on the sidewalk. When she returned to the farm, she related the curious incident to her mother. But instead of understanding, her mother scolded her. "What?" she asked, her eyes widening. "You were buying a ring and planning to elope without my blessing and the priest's?" Unabashed, Dunya shrugged. Pursing her lips, she said, "Why are you so upset? I didn't get married." "Oi," her mother said, "that's all you have to say? My God, how have I raised you?" "I'm sorry, Mama." Dunya knew better than to argue with her mother. At bedtime, she donned her nightgown and got down on her knees. After saying the Lord's Prayer, she asked God for another sign. "If Peter's the one I'm supposed to marry, have him come back to me." Satisfied with her request, she fell asleep, thinking of Peter. And that's that. If I can just go back to my slide thing, just to show you the... So just to let you know, if you have any questions and we don't have time for them, you can email me at info@dianastevan.com, and this is my website. And these 3 books represent Lucia's Family Saga series. The first one is 1915 to 1929, Lilacs in the Dust Bowl, 1929 to 1937. And Paper Roses on Stony Mountain takes you to the end of the Depression and the first few years of World War II. And that'll be out this summer in 2022. So I can stop the share, and if we have time for some questions. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time today.
Thank you so much, Maria, for such a nice presentation, and Diana for your backstory and research story. And I have to say, we have such a polite audience, they quietly clapping. It's so nice to see. We have approximately 40 people here and 10 people watching us or so on Facebook, so it's quite impressive audience. Now we have a time for questions, so please either write them in the chat or you can put your mic on, raise your hand and fire away. And from my experience, Q&A session is always as lively as everything before that. So you have the author in front of you. It doesn't happen very often that you can talk to the author and ask questions about the book you read or you didn't read yet. Okay, Sonia Garrett, great presentation, Diana. Love to get some insights into the research and writing process. Karen Dodd, I loved hearing all the background that went into your book, Diana. Yeah, that's for sure. It's a lot of work and research goes into writing a book. You mentioned that your first book, it took you 8 years approximately to finish it.
It did. It took longer than I thought it would. But I like research, and I was fascinated by that period of history. And what I felt like, God, I wish my Baba was still alive, and my mother, so I could have asked them more questions about it. But you know, I'm thankful I was able to my stories.
We're getting questions from Mahtab Narsim Khan. Did you have any readers from your family? What did they think about it?
Yes, I did. I did have readers from my family by that little girl in the family photo, Genya. I mean, she's in the early 90s and she read it, and she was a big help, especially with the second book, Alex and the Dust Bowl, because she remembered more of what had happened. So yes, I had cousins and family that have, you know, yes.
There is another question from Olga Khometa. How much fictional component is in your mostly fact-based writing?
Oh boy. Well, there's some things I had to, of course, conversations. I had to imagine how they interacted. Yes, and also, yeah, I had to fill in some blanks. So maybe 2/3 is pretty accurate, and the third is, you know, as I say, imagined conversations. And I was thankful I knew the characters, but.
Okay, great. We're getting some nice comments as well from Manuel Matas. That was wonderful, Diana. I can't wait to read your new book. It reminded me of my own family history. Your slideshow was great as well.
Thank you, Mahtab. Thank you, Sonia.
And there is a Janelle Fisher, most informative. I enjoyed it. And Paul Bennett. I feel like I've taken a mini trip overseas and back in time these past 45 minutes.
Oh, how lovely. Thank you, Paul. Appreciate that.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Oh, Maria Shuvalova is raising her hand. Okay, go ahead, please.
I would love to ask one question, as when I were reading a book, there is so much details like superstitions, songs, some rituals that people do in the church that my family were doing and still doing. So I wanted to ask you, where did you learn all these ethnic details? Was it your Baba, or you also were doing a research?
My mother and Baba, they were very superstitious. Yes, I mean, they would frighten me, actually. My mother would wake up and she'd say, oh, I had a bad dream last night, be careful. Oh, so, you know, just walking to school was a challenge sometimes. But yes, a lot of folklore that was passed down to me. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they believed in that. You know, a bird would hit a window and, oh my God, something happened, somebody died. You know, it just...
Because yes. It's fascinating that it still circulates in my family.
Yes.
And there's a follow-up to this question, Diana. Are you superstitious as well?
No, not really. But, you know, it's interesting. I had to let go of things for a long time. Like a very interesting superstition was that I had to put a piece of paper between my you know, if I was sewing anything on me, because you could sew your brains up. I mean, these are all like, it's just, when I think about it, you know, it took a while to let go of that one.
I remember that, but it was a red thread or something like that, not a piece of paper. From my grandma. coming out. Okay, this is an interesting one. Are there any software tools, web resources, etc., that help you to pull all of this together, for all of this information? For example, many authors are big fans of the Scrivener program, and this is a question from Paul Bennett.
Yes, Paul. I actually bought the Scrivener program, but I haven't used it yet. So no, it was just basically Word I was using. Word, yes. Yeah, and again, I'm just so thankful I live in a time where there is so much information available online, and I was able to, get, but it was a lot of books out of the libraries actually that helped me in terms of history and filling in some of those.
Ukraine yourself. It's a great question.
It is a great question. Well, my first language was Ukrainian, even though because my mom and dad were working, and so Baba took care of me. So I was very much steeped into the Ukrainian culture. And at the end of the church service, there was always a song that was sung about Ukraine. And at that time, Ukraine has always had one invader after the other in their history. So it was very emotional growing up, even though I felt it. I felt because I could feel the energy and emotion in the congregation. And then going back to Ukraine and seeing the village, we were at that time, it was still front desk, and they were whispering. They couldn't even talk openly in the room. We had to, so I can understand, some of that, the feelings and how difficult that is to live not freely, yes.
And that song that you mentioned in the end of the church
yes.
Service, it was translated, the first words translated loosely, "Dear big God, please save Ukraine," which always brings tears to my eyes as well.
Yes, yeah, it was very emotional. Yes, Liliana, very emotional. Yeah, God save Ukraine. Yeah, absolutely. And growing up with that, you just felt it in your whole body. Even though I wasn't born in Ukraine, I felt it,
Well, certainly you did, because we can feel it through your books. Your books, also they are fictional, like part fiction, part based on your mother and grandmother's family history, is still very close to your heart. And these amazing books, I love them.
Thank you so much, Julia.
There is a comment from Marie Sekler. Wonderful reading of books, especially for anyone of Ukrainian heritage. Loved reading Ukrainian words. Reminded me of my upbringing and my Baba. Mahtab Narsimkhan has another question. What do you hope readers will take away from your novels?
The importance of family and that bond, how it will take, no matter what is going on. I mean, our families are, so dear to our hearts, the good and the bad. And, we're none of us are perfect human beings, unfortunately. So the struggle to find some kind of peace, and that's universal, and so I've been quite pleased to find that people from other backgrounds too can identify with those struggles, with a mother's love for her children and wanting the best for it. And this is why she emigrated, because there wasn't going to be enough land for her family under Polish occupied Ukraine. They weren't giving her any more. So this is why the Canadian offer was so attractive to her at that time. I mean, she didn't want to leave. I mean, she left her mother behind, but yes, she did that for her children.
Karen Dodd, I love that you've been able to preserve and pass on your heritage for your children and grandchildren by writing these books, and for Canadian writers altogether. I think these books will be read by many generations to come, and probably studied also in colleges, universities, and schools. Thank you very much, Diana. Before we wrap up, I will give a chance to Maria and to you to say goodbye. So Maria, go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much for writing, and I'm highly encouraged to read these books and recommend it to all your friends. Thank you so much for organizing this event and for supporting Ukraine.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Uliana, too. I didn't thank you at the very beginning, but you've been so wonderful as a moderator, and I really appreciate all your support.
Thank you. And I just take a moment to acknowledge our sponsor. So I would like to thank everyone for joining. I also would like to acknowledge the Shevchenko Foundation, General Grant Pillar number 5, Delta Bingo, and our media sponsor, Kontakт Ukrainian Television Network. Thank you to Alex Taraiev, our Zoom specialist and a member of the board. And we invite you to join us again on March 6th, when we will be joined by the author from Vancouver, Miron Petriv, who is, I believe today is in our audience. And it's nice to see you, Pane Petriv. I just wanted to remind you that all the webinars and other programming events could be viewed on the YouTube channel called Ukrainian Canadian Art Foundation. So please subscribe and support our programming. And thank you for joining us, and enjoy your Sunday. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
До побачення.